Previously on Starseed Psyche, Kyo Adachi is a member of the advanced military program, the Suberaith Squadrons, fighting against a horde of mysterious mechanical invaders referred to by the media and most of humanity as the Kyusidians, that most people believe were created and sent by the alien race, the Kyusidians, who originally created humanity hundreds of thousands of years ago for selfish reasons, but have become better since and recently returned to Earth to try and help humanity. Kyo has now learned from a young Kyusidian woman, Fayestrial, that he himself was once a Kyusidian. He underwent a ritual for his soul to be reincarnated as a human to help humanity during this time. The term for people such as this is a starseed. Unfortunately, this isn't something that any military leaders would be likely to hear him out on, now that everything Fayestrial has told him has helped Kyo see that someone else is very likely behind the attacks, not the Kyusidians. Kyo also learned from Squad Captain Yamada Toshiko that she is a Suberite starseed, which allowed her to create the Suberaith tech the military now uses. She's also been waiting for another starseed to appear among the soldiers, but she is also of the belief that Kyo is a Suberite starseed instead of a Kyusidian starseed, and she still seems to suspect that the Kyusidians are behind the attacks. Kyo knows that there are other more likely possibilities, such as the reptilian technology-obsessed race called the Repsoros being behind the attacks. Either way, he has to field his career knowing much more about aliens than most, while trying to figure out how to save his world, and also deciphering the truth behind a sort of prophecy he was told by his spirit guide Yorick. Yamada Toshiko and Fayestrial shook Kyo's hand on a foretold day, and now he knows that one is destined to be the love of his life and the other his greatest rival. But he isn't sure which is which. Let's learn more as Kyo does in the next chapters of Starseed Psyche. The next couple days didn't play out how I'd expected. I returned to the base and learned that because of the Kyusidian bomb having detonated in the basement, the debriefing assembly was delayed until the afternoon. I knew I'd take the opportunity to sleep, but first I went to check in on Chip in the medical wing. Unfortunately, he was nowhere to be found. It was a very busy place with many injured people and doctors scrambling around trying to help, so I thought I might just be missing him. I asked a doctor if she knew anything, and she scowled surprisingly angrily. She said that Chip had been taken to a specialized facility for a procedure that doctors here weren't qualified for on the orders of the Chief of Staff himself, Shijikaburu. The order was given through General Yamada Ritsu, who apparently herself had headed off to this facility as well. The orders claimed Chip was enough of an asset in the field that they wanted to get him patched up quickly by using an experimental procedure. That worried me, but apparently he agreed to it of his own free will. It made sense that he'd do anything to get back in the game soon. I just hoped this wasn't a reckless or dangerous decision. I checked in on Oda Miraka from my squad while I was there too. She'd lost her foot in the attacks and seemed to be taking it as well as could be expected. We both took a moment to mourn Sarata Suta's death, but I was rushed out of there pretty quick to make space for the doctors to do their work. After that, I went to look for Toshiko. I did need sleep, but also wanted to check in with her. She'd run off pretty fast when we'd been talking, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay. Not long after I started asking around, I got a text from her. She said she'd gotten my number from Captain Hekima. The very formally written text read, "Hello, Kyo. I'm very sorry that I can't speak with you more about your Suberite origins, but my mother has agreed to do something profoundly stupid, and I have to do my best to stop her. I will return as soon as I can and look forward to discussing things with you further. Toshiko." I replied saying take all the time she needed, and told her that if she wanted to talk or vent about whatever was going on with her mom, she could call me. She thanked me, and then I didn't hear from her at all for the next 2 days. It did worry me a bit that General Yamada Ritsu was apparently doing something profoundly stupid at the same secret medical space Chip was in. I hoped whatever she was doing wasn't connected to Chip's treatment. I tried texting Chip, but later found his phone on his bed back in our bunk room. Even with all the insanity going on, I managed to get 3 solid hours of sleep. It wasn't much, but I still felt pretty energized and ready to go afterwards. I went to the assembly that afternoon, seeing that at least 15% of the Suberaith soldiers weren't accounted for, and listened to the very brief debriefing. They told us that the losses in the recent attacks were unfortunate, but could not lessen our resolve. They told everyone about the bomb going off in the basement, and that the reason was unknown, given everyone working on it died instantly when it went off. We were told that some new options for combating the Kyusidians had been approved because of the recent losses and would be implemented soon. They were implying that the Suberaith gauntlets weren't good enough anymore, which seemed like the wrong conclusion to me, given I knew they were the primary weapon of the Suberites. If they were good enough for the Galactic Federation's Space Police Force, they should be good enough for us. The last thing they told us was that after the next 2 days, in which we could leave the base if need be to mourn or see family, we'd have another assembly and confirm the new Suberaith squads, reformed after the losses. I took a few hours to check in with members of my squad, though Captain Hekima was nowhere to be found either. The more I thought about him, the weirder our last interaction felt. His reaction to the bomb going off was so cold. I knew he was a master actor who could act cold when he needed to, but I thought the real him was much kinder and warmer than that. After a bit of time with the squad, I left the base to go visit my mother. I knew she'd be worried, so I even spent the night at her place and took her out for breakfast. It was nice catching up with her, even though she desperately wanted me to leave the squad. I did my best to assure her that this was the life I wanted and needed to live, and she accepted it enough to let me go back. I also checked in once with Fayestrial using the disc thing she'd given me. She was as calming and reassuring as ever, and said that she was tracking some strange military activity headed into Chichibutamakai National Park. She wasn't sure what it was about, but it was unusual enough for her to follow in her cloaked ship. I got back to base and did a bit of dance practice just to pass the time and stay agile. Eventually I went to bed, and soon enough, it was the next day, and the time came for the next assembly. On my way to that was when I finally saw both Hekima and Toshiko. They were in a hall near the hangar where the assembly would be held, and I caught a glimpse of Hekima bowing deeply to Toshiko, profusely apologizing for something. All I heard him say was that it wasn't his decision. That seemed closer to what I thought the real Hekima was like, always very upset when he's hurt someone. But what had he done to Toshiko? She said that whatever it was wasn't his fault, but she was clearly not pleased. They parted ways and she walked towards me. Her face slightly softened when she saw me. Still, she walked quickly to me and nodded for me to follow. I asked, "Are you okay? What was that about?" She shook her head. "We've got our work cut out for us, Kyo. The Chief of Staff has always been displeased with me for not sharing the formula for making Suberaith gear, so Japan could more widely sell it and trade it to other countries, but apparently they'd been working on a backup plan that definitely is not ready for field tests. That last attack pushed them into using it anyway. We've got to take the Kyusidians down fast, or there could be some very dangerous changes coming to the Suberaith program and militaries all around the world." She stopped just outside the doors and turned to me. I stopped too. She looked me in the eyes. "We'll figure this out. The squads aren't going to shape up how I planned, but we are still going to be together. With 2 Suberites on the case, we'll get this taken care of before anything worse happens." I went through a whole tornado of thoughts to respond with, but just nodded. I'd have to tell her the truth soon, but there wasn't time for that now. I followed the nod by asking, "Is your mother okay, by the way?" She let out an agitated sigh and said, "You'll see for yourself soon." We both went inside the hangar. As I walked, I noticed there were a few camera crews hanging around. I hadn't expected this to be a televised event. I went and stood in line with my squad. Mirika was on a prosthetic foot, but Chip was still nowhere to be seen. Hekima was up on the elevated platform in front of us with the other Suberaith squad captains, including Toshiko. A general came to the podium and introduced the Chief of Staff himself, Shijikaburu, to take the stage. He'd never addressed us all directly before. He was a short but very fit older man with gray hair and perfect posture. He said, "The enemy is changing. The Kyusidians are growing in numbers and technological aptitude. They're adapting to our tactics. Perhaps if we had far more Suberaith soldiers around the country and the world, we could handle them, but due to unfortunate incompetencies in the manufacturing of them, this has not been a possibility." I cringed, feeling that direct shot at Toshiko, who gave no visible reaction. He went on, "But if you consider this threat to be the greatest humanity will face, then you are being childishly short-sighted. The Kyusidians, we have seen a mere iota of the forces the universe has waiting for us. As humanity broaches a new technological age, so must we build weapons that can protect our kind from those that have centuries of advancement ahead of us. Thankfully, our most brilliant scientists and doctors have developed new weapons technology that will make even the Suberaith suits look like children's playthings. That struck me as a very distasteful thing to say to a room full of soldiers who'd trained extensively to use the Suberaith tech. Now that we have approval to implement the first field tests, I rejoice in introducing to you the future of advanced human warfare through our brave and noble General Yamada Ritsu. I didn't see where she could be coming up on stage from, but a blur shot into the air from behind a nearby jet. It crashed down right in front of the stage and cracked the floor. The figure stood up and rolled her shoulders. Instead of bowing, General Yamada Ritsu raised an armored fist to her chest and gave a slight bow. Everyone else was in awe, but a chill ran through me. Her clawed, armored hand looked way too similar to the tech used by the Repsoros. Shijikaburu continued, General Yamada is the first person to undergo the procedure needed to command the Tekigami Claw, and all the might bestowed along with it. Chips implanted in her brain and joints of her arm take her a step ahead of us all into humanity's bright future. She now not only wields but has also become a weapon, long in development that will revolutionize how we fight, both the Kyusidians and any other opposition humanity may face. General Ritsu raised her arm to the side and aimed it at a target on the other side of the hangar I hadn't even noticed was there. It was made of metal, was nearly the size of a truck, and had a shoddily painted Kyusaurus on it. Her arm began to glow red as a small sleek cannon emerged from it. She fired it dead center on the target and the entire thing exploded in sparking red lightning. We all felt the shockwave hit us. She very swiftly and stoically retracted the weapon and lowered her arm to her side. The Chief of Staff continued before much reaction could be given. This technology not only transmutes her arm into a lethal weapon, but it also allows her muscle strength to be rapidly amplified for moments at a time. It can shift the density of her bones to reduce strain and injury on high impacts, allowing leaps and movement like the one she's already shown. Once General Yamada, and the few others selected, show the world what the mere initial scratches at the surface of Tekigami technology can do, mass production will inevitably be demanded. You will all be given the option to use it yourselves, and the human race will never feel threatened again by whatever feeble forces alien races can bring our way. There was raucous cheering. I clapped along, but not very enthusiastically. I didn't know what exactly to make of it all, but that technology was unmistakably similar to the Repsoros. Could it be a coincidence? If there were Repsoros in the Japanese military, did that mean they weren't behind the Kyusidians? Could they be playing both sides for some reason? Or was I being closed-minded? Fayestrial didn't say technology was bad, just that over-reliance on it could stop us from solving our real problems. When the applause eventually dwindled, Shijika gestured to the camera crews to cut recording. They did as ordered and filed out. Once they were gone, he continued, I have more good news still. Our intelligence has finally led us to discover what we suspect to be a Kyusidian base hidden in a system of caves beneath Chijibu Tamakai National Park. Now that we are forming new Suberaith Squadrons to account for our losses, there will be an elite squadron made up of our best soldiers, who will fight alongside General Yamada to lead an assault on this base. This will be called the Slayer Squadron, and they will be the boot that squashes any concerns that humanity cannot fend for itself. General Ritsu leapt up onto the stage in a graceful bound and stood next to the Chief of Staff. He went on, This squad will be led by the best of the squad captains we have in the Suberaith program. It clicked into my mind who he'd say just before he said it. I suddenly knew what Hekima had been apologizing to Toshiko for. Slayer Squad Captain Hekima Aka was introduced and bowed proudly to the crowd. I didn't have to look around to know people would be confused. Hekima was great, but Toshiko was pretty widely accepted to be the best captain, as the maker of the Suberaith tech and the most proficient with it. Shijika then gave over the podium to Hekima. It is an honor, Chief of Staff. The rest of the Slayer Squadron will be as follows. The names given weren't much of a surprise. Yamada Toshiko and former squad captain Yoichi Roku were both brought in as irrefutably some of the best soldiers we had. Roku was a unique case of a Suberaith soldier who used a custom-built gauntlet for his leg instead of his arms. He could be a bit egotistical from what I'd heard, but he also had the skills to back it up. My name was said next, but they skipped over mention of me bringing in the Kyusidian bomb that had gone off, which I appreciated, despite many knowing it was the case. Next, they said Chip would be joining when he returned in a few days from medical treatment. I was both happy and a bit concerned. Had he gone through the same procedure as General Ritsu? Would he have a crazy metal arm now too? They gave one more name, Akuma Calico. I didn't know much about her other than the fact that she was vicious, and during training had embraced any opportunity to get a new scar. I was sad to not hear Quinn's name come up, but thankfully they then said that for the last 3 members, there would be a competition held with 10 other soldiers who'd been considered for the squad. Quinn was in that list, and I hoped it meant she'd make the cut too. They told us the competition would be held the next day. Slayer Squad training would take place over the following 3 days for us to all get acquainted with each other's skills. Then, one more day later, if all went as planned, we'd lead an assault on the Kyusidian base. I didn't know what exactly was bubbling beneath the surface of this whole situation, both in the Kyusidian forces and maybe even in our own military, but it was time to start getting serious about figuring out what it was. After all the announcements were made, the Slayer Squadron was taken into a private meeting room. We were all given a chance to properly meet. It was a pretty quick and uneventful greeting, except when I bowed to Calico. The brief glimpse into her eyes I got was like staring death in its scarred face, and really creeped me out. Then we were shown training footage of each other to get a better sense of how we all fought. I noticed an envious look from Roku upon seeing me fight with 2 blades. We were all told that we wouldn't just be watching the competition for the new squad members the following day, but we would be the competition. The current Slayer Squadron would be given full use of our Suberaith suits, and the potential recruits would get nothing except the same sort of beanbag guns used on us in Suberaith tryouts. They'd only have 10 shots each. Their task was to get 3 hits on the same Suberaith soldier. The first 3 people to do that would make it onto the squad. They could pick up their beanbags to use again, but if we blocked them with our blades, the bags would probably get destroyed, so they had to choose their shots carefully. General Ritsu would be able to use the stun mode on the cannon that emerged from the back of her forearm. She wouldn't use the lethal function she'd already shown off, though I was kind of concerned about whether it could malfunction and go off by accident. This was experimental tech after all, tech that Toshiko had claimed was definitely not ready for field tests. When the meeting concluded, we were told to rest up for the next day. As everyone was getting up, mine and Toshiko's eyes immediately locked onto each other. It was finally time to talk. I was pretty nervous. At this point, I was convinced that Fayestrial was the love of my life, meaning Toshiko was my arch-rival, but I still didn't know if that meant we'd be enemies. I mean, Quinn kind of acted like my rival a lot of the time, but we were also good friends. I knew Toshiko wasn't going to be thrilled to learn I was actually a Kyusidian Starseed, but would she be so mad that she'd want to hurt me? If she found out I was in cahoots with a Kyusidian, would she try to have me arrested or something? I didn't know how the conversation was going to go, but as I followed her out of the room and headed down the hall to the doors outside, I noticed the time was 3:33, the angel number for support. Yorick had my back. I had to trust that whatever happened would ultimately be for my highest good. We walked about 100 meters from the building towards the tree line in silence, until I finally asked, "So, how are you feeling about all that?" She took a deep breath. "Like I'm watching humanity become more moronic every day. I know I chose to become a human partially to try and help, but sometimes they make it so infuriating. For someone who's very intelligent most of the time, Ritsu can make very thoughtless decisions." I didn't know exactly where we were going, but I followed Toshiko into the trees about 50 meters before she stopped and faced me. "But in spite of everything, finally knowing that you're a Starseed too is going to make everything so much easier. I've never been able to talk to anyone about this stuff, so this is a massive relief." "So, what do you need to know? Where should I start?" Speaking carefully, I said, "Well, funny enough, since our last chat, I've actually had a lot more memories return. I know about the Suberites being like an epic space police force for the Galactic Federation, and about the Repsoros and the history of Kyusidians and humans. Her eyes widened and she stepped closer. Wow, that's unexpected since you haven't worn a gauntlet in the last few days, but also fantastic. You might know more than I do now. Have you remembered anything about the Kyusidians that might help us figure out how and when they built the Kyuserax? I paused, again thinking about how I spoke. Why are you so convinced that the Kyusidians really are behind this? Confused, she tilted her head. Well, because of course they are. They created us to be a slave race in the first place, and now are back to either try enslaving us again or wiping us out for revenge. I mean, the enemy is literally called the Kyuserax, right? With each word, she sounded more hesitant. It was the first time I actually felt like I had more authority on something than her. I shook my head. Well, yeah, but the media dubbed them that. They never called themselves that. The so-called Kyuserax don't even speak. And the Kyusidians have changed a lot in the hundreds of thousands of years since they made us. If my memories are right anyway, they learned from their mistakes and are on the Galactic Federation now. They came back to help us and... what's the phrase? Like, humanity's collective ego or whatever is rejecting their help out of fear. I'd guess it's the Repsoros that are behind this somehow. They're even making the Kyuserax look pretty blatantly like lizards now, almost like they're rubbing it in the Kyusidians' faces that they're being framed. Toshiko's face went pale. Her eyes darted back and forth across the ground, thinking. She turned away and started pacing and muttering. The Kyusidians are on the Galactic... They are? Why didn't I remember that? Did I block that out? I'm such an idiot! Whoa, no, you're not. I walked closer and put a tentative hand on her shoulder. This is all confusing. Every time I talk about it, I literally feel like a crazy person. You can't beat yourself up over what you don't remember from a past life. She walked away from my hand, slumped down, and leaned against a tree. She just sat there, processing for a moment, then bumped her head angrily against the trunk. I know this is a bad habit of mine, but I have a tendency to think of myself as better than humans because I used to be a Suberite. But look at me! I fell into the exact same traps they did. I've been surrounded by people like Ritsu my whole life who have wired me to be skeptical of any possible threat and to just listen blindly to authorities, so... I can't believe it. I just went along with them as they all decided the Kyusidians were behind this. It was a relief that she wasn't staying locked in on the Kyusidians being the bad guys, but now I just felt bad for her. I walked over and sat in front of her. We knew becoming human would be difficult. That's all part of coming here, right? So is it possible that part of you wanted this struggle and confusion? Maybe it'll help you be more empathetic to humans who just go along with what authorities say too. If even a Suberite who has more reason to know better could get tricked, then of course humans could easily be tricked too. She was clearly still frustrated with herself, but cracked a slight smile. I guess so. That's not the main experience I wanted in coming here, though. I know that much for sure. I didn't physically lean in, but I felt like emotionally I had, as I asked, what do you mean? She sighed. What I remember most clearly out of everything was that my main reason for wanting to be human wasn't even to help humanity. Don't get me wrong, I did want that, and the idea of being a soldier unlike anything in this species was an exciting power fantasy, but the main reason I wanted to become a human was to have a romantic relationship as a human. She very deliberately stopped making eye contact as she said that, which was good because my face definitely did something weird as she said that. I don't know how it looked, but I know how it felt, and it was weird. Looking up at the trees, she said, I don't know if you remember this about our people, but Suberites were all the same sex and had close friendships in their squads, but didn't have romantic relationships. I remember I really wanted one, but didn't know anyone else that had the same desire. Every other species had them, and I was jealous. So when I found out about starseeds, I did everything I could to get chosen to be one, and was granted the chance. I even remember choosing that Yamada Ritsu would be my mother, which feels like a baffling decision now, I chose to be a human female, but also chose to be born to one of the most masculine women on the planet. That didn't leave me much influence growing up to embrace my femininity. Despite my shock at what she was admitting, I was still intrigued enough to ask, "You remember that much detail about choosing to come here? You picked your mom?" She looked at me again. "Yeah, I remember that, but I don't remember why. It seems like a bad call now. Don't get me wrong, she's inspiring in a lot of ways and did make an easier pathway for me to get into the Japanese military. Plus, through her and my dad's connections to the American military, I always had plenty of resources to develop a human equivalent of the Suberaith tech, but Ritsu has such a narrow view of leadership. I think because it was so difficult for her to be seen as a stoic and respected female general, she is completely unwilling to question orders and does everything her superiors tell her no matter what. She blankets over it by saying it's because people above you earned their position and therefore know better than you, but really it's just insecurity. She thinks if she questions an order, she risks losing everything she's gained in her career. Because of that, she and I haven't gotten along very well in the last few years. There was massive pressure on her to get Suberaith gauntlets and suits into mass production, and I refused. She may not be willing to deny direct orders, but I am. Plus, it's not like I could share the way to make Suberaith gauntlets anyway. Every single one has to be made through me, or at least someone like us. Our Suberaith abilities from our last life allow us to imbue them with the needed energy to start functioning. The Suberite spark. Do you remember that? I shook my head. She smirked. Well, now that you know, don't go off and start imbuing weapons with it and selling them. I know we need them to stop the Kyusidians, but I don't trust humanity to have these weapons on a mass scale. They'll just end up killing each other with them. But I guess now they might just do that with the Tekigami claws and weapons anyway. She made firm eye contact with me again. As frustrating as the last few days have been, I can't express how nice it is to finally get to talk openly to someone like this. I don't know how many Suberite starseeds are out there, but I'm so glad I finally know you're one too. I thought it might be the case for a while, but was too nervous to ask for so long. I feel much less alone with you here, Kyo. My heart started pounding. I was trying to think of how to phrase what I needed to say when she leapt up. By the way, she suddenly started twirling around me, throwing perfect balletic pirouettes. She slowed her spin, standing on her toes, and raised one leg in full extension straight into the air. I've seen some of your moves. You're pretty impressive. I leapt up. You do ballet? She continued to spin, throwing perfectly executed sautés and glissades before stopping again. Like I said, being part of a military family and having Ritsu as my mother, my life has been led by a very masculine energy. Even before regaining my memories, I had a sense that I wanted to embrace more of a feminine energy, so I took ballet classes on the side for most of my teen years. I don't take classes now, but the principles of movement apply nicely to Suberaith combat. I'm sure you've found the same, right? In response, I started to show off some of my own moves too. It was hard in the clunky boots I was wearing, but I did my best, and she started to twirl again. We both smiled and laughed in awe of each other's movements before coming closer together and stopping. My face was inches from hers, and I noticed her eyes dart ever so briefly down to my lips. My heart practically exploded out of my chest, but I thought about Fayestrial. What about her? Was I wrong? Was Toshiko really the love of my life? Either way, I knew I couldn't kiss her, at least not before coming clean. Toshiko? I inched slightly back and could feel the disappointment emanate off her. I have to tell you something. I don't know how you're gonna take it, but I really don't want to make things weird between us. I'm really glad we're able to talk like this too, and connect like this. She took a slight step back. Okay, what is it? I did my best not to choke on my words as I said, I'm not a Suberite starseed. I'm a Kyusidian starseed. Her face went through a series of expressions, but finally landed on relief. Oh, okay, well, right. I suppose I shouldn't have presumed that you were a Suberite. I guess it hadn't crossed my mind that there were other kinds of starseeds. And that makes more sense as to why you have more memories about the Kyusidians and their role in the universe. I'm sorry I was so stuck in the mindset that your people were behind the Kyusidians, but of course that doesn't need to complicate things between us. I smiled slightly, but she didn't realize there was more for me to say. Okay, great. I'm glad you feel that way, but also I didn't exactly get my memories back on my own. I had help. Her eyes narrowed. Help from something other than the Suberaith gauntlets? I opened my mouth to try answering, but someone else spoke instead. Yes, he had help from me. Fayestrial's voice sprang out of nowhere, then she decloaked only a few feet away from us. Toshiko instinctively dropped into a combat stance, but Fayestrial just put her hands behind her back innocently, showing no threatening intent. I didn't intend to disturb you, but in human fiction I've read and watched, that exact sort of moment is when the person referenced would reveal themselves, so I couldn't resist. Toshiko's wide, confused, and angry eyes darted towards me. I raised my hands defensively. Okay, I swear, I did not know she was here, but, yeah. Yamada Toshiko, I guess, meet Fayestrial. There may as well have been steam shooting out of Toshiko's ears, whether it was because I was working with a Kyusidian who is illegally on the planet, or because I clearly had at least some sort of relationship with Fayestrial. Toshiko was not thrilled about the situation. Suddenly, a voice in my head said, I was gonna warn you she was there, Pumpkin, but I just couldn't do it. That moment was too spectacular to avoid. Thanks, Yorick. Really feeling the support, bud. Like a lot of the art I've been making lately, what I made in this episode is directly inspired by someone I'm covering in Illustrator Reacts, though not art that I've already covered, art that I'm going to talk about in a future episode. If you want some good art inspiration and you haven't checked out that series, I recommend checking it out. In the latest episode, I covered some stuff from my childhood like Bone and Goosebumps comics. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is something that crossed my mind earlier this week as a way to think about what your mind is doing when it keeps churning on some kind of negative or frustrating thought spiral. You can almost try looking at it as if it is a very, very pushy salesman trying to sell you something that you absolutely know you do not need. It'll keep trying to tell you how important it is to keep thinking about this thought and selling you the idea that this thought is of the utmost importance. But just remind yourself that it's being a pushy salesman that's trying to sell you something you don't need. Looking at it from that sort of comedic tone, I don't know, might give you the little shove you need to get out of that thought spiral. I hope that's helpful or inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.